The tiny wolf cub should never have survived the night. Rain lashed the forest without mercy, drumming against towering pines until the entire mountain seemed to shiver beneath the storm. Cold mist crawled between broken branches, hiding the narrow paths that hunters had followed for hours. Somewhere beyond the curtain of rain, the sharp cry of frightened birds burst into the darkness, followed by the distant bark of hunting dogs. Then, silence. Not the peaceful silence of an untouched forest. The heavy silence that always came after something terrible had happened. Beneath the tangled roots of an ancient pine lay a tiny grey wolf cub. Its soaked fur clung tightly to its trembling body. Tiny paws pressed desperately against the motionless form of its mother, nudging her again and again, unable to understand why she no longer answered. The great she-wolf had died protecting her child. A broken spear still rested beneath her shoulder. The smell of blood drifted through the cold air. The cub let out another weak cry. Not a howl. Not yet. Only the helpless cry of a child who still believed someone would come. Far away, flickering lights began dancing between the trees. Torches. Voices. Hunters. They can't be far now. I saw fresh tracks. The pup is worth a fortune. Their laughter echoed through the forest like knives scraping across stone. The little wolf tried to hide beneath its mother's body, but fear had stolen the strength from its tiny legs. It was alone, completely alone, until another sound entered the forest. Soft footsteps. Careful. Unhurried. Someone was walking toward the cries instead of away from them. Morning rarely arrived gently in the kingdom of Valina. Long before sunlight touched the snowy peaks, pale silver mist drifted through endless forests where ancient trees had stood for centuries. Rivers carried crystal water down from the mountains, winding through quiet villages whose people lived simple lives beneath the watchful shadow of nature. Most travelers avoided Blackwood Forest. They whispered stories beside warm fireplaces about spirits wandering beneath its branches. About wolves whose eyes glowed like moonlight. About forgotten kings whose names had faded into legend. Whether those stories were true or not, very few people entered the forest willingly. One of them did. Her name was Elara. She owned no castle, no title, no riches. Her small wooden cottage rested alone near the edge of the forest, surrounded by herbs, wildflowers, and rows of carefully tended healing plants. Ivy climbed across the stone chimney, while colorful birds nested beneath the roof every spring. The villagers often smiled whenever they spoke about her. If a bird breaks its wing, take it to Elara. If your horse falls sick, go find Elara. If a child catches winter fever, she'll know what to do. She never turned anyone away. Neither people, nor animals. Foxes sometimes slept beside her garden during cold evenings. Deer wandered close enough to eat apples from her hands. Even the smallest rabbits seemed strangely unafraid of the quiet young woman whose gentle voice never rose above the wind. Some called it kindness. Others believed nature simply trusted her. Elara never thought about it. Helping others felt as natural as breathing. That morning she carried a woven basket through the dripping forest, searching for moonleaf blossoms that only opened after heavy rain. Her boots sank softly into wet earth while tiny drops slid from pine needles overhead. The storm had broken branches across nearly every trail. Fresh bark scented the cold air. Somewhere nearby, a woodpecker tapped rhythmically against an old oak. Everything seemed peaceful. Until she noticed the tracks. Boot prints. Many of them. Deep. Fresh. She crouched quietly, brushing away leaves with careful fingers. Heavy boots. Iron heels. Hunters. Too many for ordinary game. Her expression tightened. She had seen those tracks before. Lord Garrick's men. The thought alone made the forest seem colder. Lord Garrick ruled the northern estates with fear instead of honor. His grand stone manor overlooked the valleys below, while mounted soldiers collected impossible taxes from poor farmers who could barely survive each winter. Yet money alone never satisfied him. He hunted because he enjoyed watching beautiful things fall. Great stags. Golden hawks. Mountain bears. Nothing escaped his obsession with trophies. Worst of all, wolves. Every wolf pelt hanging inside his great hall had once belonged to a living creature. The thought made Ilara's stomach tighten. She rose slowly, intending to leave the trail behind. Then she heard it. A tiny cry. Barely louder than the falling rain. She froze. Another cry followed. Weak. Broken. Somewhere beyond the fallen trees. Without hesitation, she left the path and pushed through thick undergrowth. Branches scratched against her sleeves. Wet leaves brushed her face. The cries grew louder. Finally she reached a clearing carved open by the storm. One enormous pine had crashed to the ground, tearing apart bushes beneath its weight. There, under its shattered branches, lay the wolf. The mother was enormous. Even in death she looked magnificent. Silver-grey fur shimmered beneath the rain. One front leg remained stretched protectively toward the tiny cub pressed against her chest. The spear wound told the entire story. She had not died hunting. She had died defending. Ilara slowly knelt. The cub looked up. Its eyes. Golden. Not bright like fire. Soft. Almost human. Fear filled them completely. It tried to growl. Only a tiny squeak escaped instead. Its body shook violently. Cold. Exhaustion. Hunger. Ilara carefully removed her wool cloak. It's all right, she whispered softly. The cub backed away only a few inches before collapsing again. Its strength was gone. She glanced toward the spear. Fresh blood still stained the wood. This had happened recently. Very recently. Then, a dog barked somewhere beyond the trees. Close. Too close. Voices followed. I found blood. Search the clearing. They couldn't have gone far. Ilara's breathing caught. They were coming. If the hunters found the cub, she already knew what would happen. Its tiny body would become another prize hanging inside Garrick's hall. She looked toward the frightened little wolf. Then toward the approaching voices. There was no time to think. Only time to choose. Slowly. Very slowly. She reached forward. The cub flinched. Its tiny ears flattened. Its breathing became quick and uneven. Ilara stopped moving. She waited. Rain continued falling around them. Neither one moved. Finally, the cub crawled forward on trembling legs. Only one small step. Then another. Its cold nose brushed against her fingertips. The touch lasted less than a heartbeat. But somehow, it changed everything. Without another moment of hesitation, Ilara gently wrapped the cub inside her cloak. It weighed almost nothing. The little wolf buried itself against the warmth of her chest, too exhausted to resist. She rose to her feet just as distant torchlight flickered between the trees. They're over here. She hurried into the forest. Not running. Running made noise. Instead she moved quickly through narrow deer paths only someone who truly knew the woods could follow. The hunters spread behind her like wolves chasing wounded prey. Branches snapped. Dogs barked louder. Voices grew closer. Someone's ahead. This way. Ilara's heartbeat thundered inside her ears. The cub remained silent beneath her cloak. Almost unbelievably silent. As though it somehow understood that one sound could end both their lives. The rain helped erase footprints. Streams carried away scent. Fallen logs forced the hunters to slow. Twice she stepped off the trail into icy water before climbing back onto dry stones farther downstream. The tricks had been taught to her years ago by her late father, a woodsman who believed every forest rewarded patience more than speed. Tonight, those lessons saved them. After nearly an hour, the voices finally faded into the distance. Only then did Ilara stop beneath a towering cedar tree. She leaned against its rough trunk, breathing heavily. The forest had become quiet again. The cub slowly pushed its head from beneath the cloak. Its golden eyes looked directly into hers. There was no fear now. Only confusion. And something else. Trust. Small. Fragile. Just beginning. Ilara gently stroked the damp fur behind its ears. You'll be safe. The cub closed its eyes. For the first time since losing its mother. It fell asleep. Neither of them noticed the enormous shadow standing high upon a rocky cliff overlooking the valley. A massive black wolf watched without making a sound. Its amber eyes never left the sleeping cub, nor the young woman carrying it home. Then, as silently as it had appeared, the great wolf disappeared into the mist. Before dawn broke across Verlina, someone else had already learned what Elara had done. The first light of dawn slipped quietly across the mountains, painting the highest peaks with pale gold while the valleys below remained wrapped in soft grey mist. Thin ribbons of smoke rose from distant village chimneys, and somewhere beyond the hills, church bells welcomed another ordinary morning. But nothing about that morning was ordinary. Inside her little cottage, Elara sat beside the stone fireplace, feeding another piece of dry pine into the flames. Warm light danced across the wooden walls, filling the room with the comforting smell of burning cedar and fresh herbs hanging from the ceiling. Near the hearth, wrapped in an old wool blanket, the tiny wolf cub slept so deeply that even the crackling fire failed to wake it. Its breathing was slow now, peaceful. Every so often one small paw twitched, as though it were chasing something through a happier dream. Elara smiled faintly. The storm had nearly taken its life. Now warmth was slowly giving it back. She dipped a clean cloth into warm water and gently wiped the dried mud from the cub's face. Beneath the dirt, its soft grey fur shone like polished silver. A faint scar crossed its tiny shoulder. Not from age. From the hunter's spear that had struck its mother. The sight tightened her chest. So small, she whispered to herself. And already carrying the weight of cruelty. The cub stirred. Its ears flicked once. Slowly its golden eyes opened. For a brief moment confusion filled them. Then they found Elara. The fear that had lived inside those eyes the night before quietly faded. Instead, the little wolf stretched its tiny neck toward her hand. Its cold nose brushed against her fingers. Not searching for food. Searching for comfort. Elara gently scratched behind its ears. You must be hungry. She warmed fresh goat's milk over the fire and poured it into a shallow wooden bowl. The cub approached cautiously. It sniffed the milk. Looked back at her. Only after she nodded softly did it begin drinking. Tiny laps. Slow at first. Then faster. Before long the bowl was empty. For the first time since she had found it, the cub gave a sound that wasn't filled with fear. A tiny satisfied huff. The sound made Elara laugh quietly. The cottage suddenly felt much less lonely. Outside, winter continued loosening its grip on the valley. Snow still covered the mountain peaks, but patches of green had begun appearing beneath the pines. Birdsong returned. Streams flowed stronger. Even the wind carried the scent of fresh earth instead of frozen stone. Life was returning. Yet beyond the beauty, another kind of movement had begun. Lord Garrick stood upon the balcony of his stone manor, staring toward Blackwood Forest. His hunting cloak fluttered behind him. An angry servant knelt before him with his head lowered. We searched until sunrise, my lord. And we found the mother. Garrick's eyes narrowed. The cub. The servant hesitated. We lost its trail. Silence. Then came the sharp crack of leather. Garrick's riding whip struck the stone railing so hard that birds exploded from the nearby trees. You lost a newborn wolf. My lord. It cannot survive alone. His cold voice drifted over the courtyard. Someone found it. His gaze slowly lifted toward the forest. I want every path watched. Every village searched. I don't care if you frighten the peasants. I want that cub. The servants bowed lower. None dared question him. None noticed the old stable keeper watching from the shadows. He had served Garrick's father long before the cruel lord inherited the estate. He remembered a different time. A time when wolves had been respected. Not hunted. As Garrick walked away, the old man quietly whispered to himself. Some treasures are never meant to belong to cruel hands. Back inside the cottage, the little wolf had discovered something fascinating. Butterflies. One bright blue butterfly floated lazily through the open window. The cub stared. Its ears stood perfectly straight. Its entire body froze. Then, pounce. It landed face first inside a basket of dried lavender. Purple flowers burst into the air like tiny clouds. The butterfly escaped. The cub sneezed. Ilara laughed so hard she nearly dropped the herb she was sorting. The little wolf looked almost offended. Its nose was covered in tiny purple petals. For a moment, the darkness of the previous night seemed very far away. The days passed gently. Morning became afternoon. Afternoon faded into peaceful evenings. The cub followed Ilara everywhere. If she gathered herbs, it followed. If she watered her garden, it sat nearby watching every movement. If she carried firewood, it insisted on carrying the smallest stick it could find. Its determination always outweighed its strength. Sometimes it slipped on wet grass. Sometimes the stick was twice its own size. Yet it never gave up. Each tiny success made its tail wag proudly. Ilara never realized how often she smiled now. The cottage no longer echoed with silence. It echoed with life. Then strange things began happening. One evening, while the moon hung full above the forest, Ilara stepped outside to collect fresh water. The night felt unusually still. No wind. No insects. Even the trees seemed to be waiting. She glanced toward the little wolf sleeping near the garden. Then she stopped walking. Its fur was glowing. Not brightly. Not unnaturally. Soft silver light flowed beneath every strand of fur, like moonlight trapped beneath flowing water. The strange markings curled gently along its shoulders and back. Beautiful. Ancient. Alive. Ilara blinked. The glow faded almost immediately. The cub stretched sleepily, then continued dreaming as though nothing unusual had happened. She slowly approached. Running her fingers through its fur revealed nothing except warmth. "No," she whispered. "I imagined it." But deep inside, she knew she hadn't. The forest noticed before anyone else. The deer returned. Not one or two. Entire families wandered near the cottage without fear. Foxes rested beneath her porch. Owls perched on the roof every evening. Even an old stag with enormous antlers began drinking from the stream beside her home. Wild creatures behaved as though invisible danger had disappeared. The villagers soon noticed. One afternoon, while Ilara traded herbs in the nearby village, whispers followed her through the marketplace. "Have you heard? The wolves are returning. My brother saw one near the eastern ridge. My sheep won't even go near Blackwood anymore. They say something has awakened." Fear spread faster than truth. Some believed monsters had returned. Others claimed ancient curses were breaking. Only Ilara remained silent. She carried her basket home without speaking. Every whisper made her worry grow heavier. If the villagers became frightened enough, someone would eventually tell Garrick. That evening, she found fresh boot prints outside her cottage. Large. Heavy. Not her own. Not travelers. Hunters. Her heartbeat quickened. She searched the nearby trees. No one. Only silence. Yet someone had stood close enough to see the chimney smoke. Close enough to know someone lived there. The cub emerged from the cottage carrying the same tiny stick it had proudly claimed days earlier. The moment it smelled the footprints, its playful mood disappeared. Its ears lowered. A soft growl escaped its throat. The sound startled Ilara. It was the first time she had heard it. The cub wasn't growling from anger. It was warning her. Someone had been watching. The next morning she made a difficult decision. She could no longer leave the little wolf alone. Instead of gathering herbs near the cottage, she led it deeper into Blackwood Forest. Hidden beneath thick vines stood the forgotten ruins of an ancient stone shrine. Its roof had collapsed long ago. Moss covered every wall. Wildflowers grew through broken cracks in the floor. Old carvings of wolves still watched silently from weathered stone pillars. No one visited anymore. The villagers believed spirits guarded the place. Ilara believed only that it was safe. "This will be our secret." The cub wandered between the ancient stones. Suddenly it stopped. It walked toward the largest carved wolf, then gently pressed its forehead against the cold stone. The air changed. Just for a heartbeat. A breeze swept through the ruined shrine although no wind touched the surrounding forest. The hanging vines rustled softly. Leaves circled through the open roof. Somewhere in the distance, A deep wolf howl rolled across the mountains. Not lonely. Not threatening. It sounded like an answer. The cub lifted its head. Its golden eyes reflected the ancient carving before it. For one impossible moment, the stone wolf seemed almost alive. Ilara slowly reached for the cub. Before her fingers touched its fur, she heard another sound. Not wolves. Not wind. A horn. Long. Deep. Powerful. It echoed through the valley until every bird burst into the sky. The cub's ears shot upright. Far beyond the trees, hidden among the morning mist, dozens of figures in silver cloaks watched the forgotten shrine from horseback. None moved. None spoke. They had finally found the child they had been searching for. And before another sunrise came to Valina, the army of the Alpha King would stand at Ilara's door. The horn's final echo faded into the mountains, leaving Blackwood Forest wrapped in an uneasy silence. For several long moments, neither Ilara nor the little wolf moved. The cub stood at the center of the forgotten shrine, its golden eyes fixed toward the trees as though it sensed a presence hidden beyond the morning mist. Around them, the old stone wolves carved centuries ago seemed to watch in the same direction. A cool breeze drifted through the broken walls. The hanging vines swayed. Somewhere high above, a raven took flight. Ilara slowly rested a gentle hand on the cub's back. "We should go home." The little wolf looked at her. For the first time since she had rescued it, it did not obey immediately. Instead, it glanced once more toward the forest before finally following her down the ancient stone steps. She could not explain the feeling settling deep inside her heart. It was not fear. Not yet. It was the strange certainty that something had changed forever. The walk home felt longer than usual. The forest remained beautiful, but every familiar sound carried new meaning. A squirrel darted across a fallen log before disappearing into the trees. Sunlight filtered through towering pines, leaving shifting patterns across the narrow trail. Tiny drops of rain still clung to spider webs stretched between branches, sparkling like scattered diamonds. Yet beneath that peaceful beauty, Ilara noticed things she had never noticed before. Broken twigs. Fresh hoof prints. Boot marks that had not been there yesterday. Someone had passed through these woods. Many someones. She quietly guided the cub away from the main trail and followed a narrow stream instead. The cold water washed away their footprints. The little wolf trotted beside her without complaint, stopping now and then to sniff the air. Twice it suddenly froze. Each time, it stared into the trees until Ilara gently urged it onward. Whatever it sensed remained hidden. They reached the cottage shortly before sunset. Everything looked normal. Smoke no longer rose from the chimney. The herb garden swayed peacefully in the evening breeze. Bundles of lavender hung beneath the porch roof, filling the air with their gentle fragrance. Even the old wooden fence remained untouched. Still, something felt different. The birds were gone. Usually dozens of sparrows gathered near the garden before nightfall. Today there were none. Even the insects seemed strangely quiet. The cub stopped walking. Its ears lifted. A low growl vibrated deep inside its chest. Not loud. Barely more than a whisper. But enough to make Ilara's heartbeat quicken. She slowly stepped toward the cottage door. Nothing. No movement. No voices. She opened the door carefully. The room looked exactly as she had left it. Bowls rested neatly upon the table. Fresh herbs hung drying above the fireplace. The blanket where the cub had slept still lay beside the hearth. She let out a slow breath. Perhaps she had imagined it. Perhaps the forest had simply filled her thoughts with worry. Night settled gently over Blackwood. The moon climbed above the mountains. Clouds drifted across the stars. Inside the cottage, the fire crackled softly while Ilara prepared a simple meal of vegetable stew and fresh bread. The cub curled beside the fireplace, watching every movement she made. Its tail thumped quietly whenever she glanced in its direction. For a little while, the world felt peaceful again. Ilara carried her bowl toward the window. Outside, the forest shimmered beneath pale moonlight. She smiled faintly. "You'll be safe here." The cub lifted its head, almost as though it understood every word. Then, knock. One slow knock echoed against the wooden door. Ilara froze. No one visited after dark. Especially not during the final days of winter. Another knock. Steady. Patient. Not the hurried pounding of frightened villagers. Not the rough fists of drunken hunters. Whoever stood outside carried complete confidence. She quietly picked up the small iron poker resting beside the fireplace. The cub rose silently. Its ears flattened. She approached the door. "Who's there?" No answer. Only silence. Then came a calm voice. "We seek shelter until sunrise." The voice belonged to an older man. Firm. Respectful. Not demanding. Ilara hesitated. Hospitality was one of the oldest traditions in Valina. No traveler was refused shelter during winter nights. She slowly opened the door. A grey-haired traveler stood beneath the moonlight. His dark cloak was soaked from the evening mist. Behind him waited 3 companions leading tired horses. Each carried the appearance of ordinary merchants. Simple cloaks. Travel packs. Mud-covered boots. Nothing unusual. Yet Ilara noticed something curious. Their hands. Every one of them carried the calloused hands of trained swordsmen. The old traveler smiled gently. "My apologies for arriving so late. Our horses are exhausted. We ask only for a place beside your fire." Ilara studied them quietly. Every instinct told her these were no merchants. Still, their eyes held no cruelty, only weariness. "You may come in." The old man bowed slightly. "You honor us." The travelers entered one by one. None looked around the cottage with curiosity. None asked unnecessary questions. Each behaved with quiet discipline. The little wolf remained near the fireplace. Watching. Waiting. One younger traveler noticed it. What an unusual companion. Ilara smiled softly. "I found him alone after the storm." The old man's eyes lingered on the cub only for a heartbeat. Almost immediately he looked away. Too quickly. As though hiding recognition. "You have a kind heart." He accepted the bowl of stew she offered without another word. Hours passed. The strangers spoke little. Outside, wind whispered through the trees while the fire slowly burned lower. One by one, the travelers appeared to fall asleep. Only the old man remained awake. He quietly watched the flames. Then, he glanced toward the cub. It had fallen asleep beside Ilara's chair. The old man's weathered face softened. Very carefully, he reached inside his cloak. Not for a weapon. For a small silver pendant hanging from a leather cord. The symbol upon it matched the wolf carvings inside the forgotten shrine. Ancient. Elegant. Sacred. The moment the pendant caught the firelight, the sleeping cub opened its eyes. It stood. Walked slowly toward the old traveler. Then gently touched the pendant with its nose. The old man's hands began trembling. Very quietly. Almost too softly to hear. He whispered, "Thank the first Alpha." Ilara looked up. "What did you say?" The old traveler smiled. "Only that your little friend has excellent instincts." But his eyes betrayed him. There were tears shining there. Long before dawn, the travelers quietly prepared to leave. They thanked Ilara for her kindness, mounted their horses, and disappeared into the darkness. She watched until they vanished between the trees. The cub remained beside her. Its gaze never left the road. Then, the first rays of sunrise had not yet touched the mountains when the ground began to tremble. Very softly at first. Almost impossible to notice. Then stronger. A distant rhythm rolled across the valley. Hooves. Hundreds of them. Ilara climbed the small hill behind her cottage. The sight stole her breath. Across the northern ridge, silver banners stretched farther than the eye could see. Morning mist parted before countless mounted riders wearing polished armor that reflected the first pale light of dawn. Not an invading army. Not raiders. They advanced with perfect order. Perfect silence. Wolf emblems gleamed upon every shield. Behind them rode towering grey wolves almost as large as horses, their calm amber eyes scanning the forest with quiet intelligence. No horns sounded. No battle cries echoed. Only the steady thunder of disciplined riders approaching like the tide itself. Within minutes, the entire valley had been surrounded. Villagers stepped from their homes in stunned silence. Children clung to frightened parents. Farmers lowered their tools. Nobody understood why the king's army had come. Yet no soldier threatened anyone. No sword was drawn. The long lines of warriors simply waited. One rider finally urged his great white horse forward. His silver cloak flowed behind him. His armor bore no decoration except a single ancient crest shaped like a howling wolf beneath a full moon. He stopped before Ilara's cottage. Removed his helmet. His dark hair carried strands of silver despite the strength still visible in his face. His sharp blue eyes settled upon Ilara. Then, they slowly shifted toward the little wolf standing quietly beside her. The commander's expression changed. For just one heartbeat, the disciplined soldier looked like a man seeing a miracle he had believed lost forever. He stepped down from his horse, walked forward alone, stopped several paces away. Then, to the complete shock of every watching villager, the commander slowly dropped to one knee before the tiny wolf cub. Not in surrender, in reverence. And before anyone could understand why, a harsh voice shattered the morning calm. "Arrest that woman." Every head turned. Lord Garrick rode into the valley surrounded by dozens of armored mercenaries, his crimson cloak snapping violently in the cold wind. His eyes burned with triumph. "I accuse her of stealing property belonging to the crown." The commander's calm expression vanished. The valley, silent only moments before, stood balanced on the edge of a conflict that could decide the fate of an entire kingdom. The valley held its breath. Cold morning winds swept across the open fields, bending the tall winter grass until it moved like waves beneath a grey sky. Horses stamped nervously against the frozen ground. Armor whispered as hundreds of soldiers instinctively tightened their grip on their shields, yet not a single sword left its scabbard. Between two armies stood only a quiet healer, and a wolf cub no larger than a village dog. Lord Garrick urged his black stallion forward, its iron shoes crushing patches of frost beneath every heavy step. His crimson cloak billowed behind him like a stain across the pale landscape. His smile never reached his eyes. "There it is," he said, pointing toward the cub. "The beast my hunters tracked for days." His voice carried across the silent valley. "That animal belongs to the crown. This woman stole it." Fear spread through the gathered villagers. People exchanged uncertain glances. Some knew Ilara. They trusted her. Others knew Garrick's temper. No one dared speak. The commander of the Silver Army slowly rose from one knee. His face had become unreadable. "You are mistaken." Garrick laughed sharply. "Mistaken?" His horse snorted impatiently. "I found the carcass of the mother myself. My men followed fresh tracks. They led directly here." He pointed toward Ilara. She interfered with a lawful hunt. Ilara felt every pair of eyes turn toward her. She held the little wolf a little closer. It wasn't a hunt. Her voice remained calm despite the storm gathering around her. It was a slaughter. The words echoed across the valley. Several villagers lowered their heads. They had heard stories about Garrick's hunting parties. Now someone had finally spoken the truth aloud. Garrick's expression darkened. "You dare accuse me? I saw what your hunters left behind." The cub would have died. It had no one. For a long moment, no one moved. Then the commander stepped forward. His silver cloak stirred gently in the wind. "She speaks the truth." Garrick turned toward him. "And who exactly are you?" The commander removed the wolf-shaped clasp fastening his cloak. Sunlight struck polished silver. A ripple passed through every soldier present. The villagers gasped. Even Garrick's own mercenaries shifted uneasily. Only one group in the entire kingdom wore that ancient emblem. The royal guard of the Alpha King. Garrick's confidence faltered for the first time. "You." The commander spoke quietly. Yet every word carried the weight of law. "I am Commander Aldrin, guardian of the Northern Crown. I answer only to His Majesty." The valley became perfectly still. Even the wind seemed to pause. Garrick forced another smile. If this concerns the king, then all the more reason to return the animal. Aldrin looked toward the cub. No. His answer came without hesitation. It is not an animal. Confused whispers spread through the crowd. Aldrin slowly turned toward Ilara. You deserve the truth. She felt her heart begin to race. The commander knelt once more, not before the cub this time, but before her. You saved more than a life. His voice softened. You saved a kingdom. 20 years earlier. Long before Lord Garrick inherited his lands. Long before fear spread through the northern forests. The kingdom of Valina had lived beneath an ancient promise. The royal family was not merely protected by wolves. They were bound to them. According to legends older than the kingdom itself, the first Alpha had stood beside the first human king when darkness threatened the mountains. Together they had sworn an oath. As long as the bloodline remained pure, the wolves would guard the land. The forests would flourish. The rivers would never run dry. Generation after generation, every royal child was born beneath the moon blessing. Their first companion would always be a wolf. Not a pet. Not a servant. A soul bound by ancient magic. Then tragedy struck. Years ago, the royal caravan carrying the queen and her newborn child vanished while crossing Frostpass Ridge. The escort had been massacred. The queen disappeared. Only broken wagons and blood-covered snow remained. The kingdom believed the infant heir had died that night. The Alpha King never remarried. Never named another heir. Hope slowly disappeared. Until now. Commander Aldrin looked toward the little wolf. This cub is Prince Kalen. Silence. Complete. Absolute. Ilara stared at the tiny creature sleeping peacefully against her cloak. Impossible. The little wolf slowly lifted its head. Its golden eyes met hers. The same gentle eyes that had looked at her beneath the fallen pine. Nothing about them had changed. Yet suddenly, everything had. Lord Garrick's face lost every trace of color. Then, almost immediately, anger replaced shock. Lies. His voice cracked. Old stories. Fairy tales. There is no proof. Commander Aldrin reached inside his armor. He removed an ancient silver medallion marked with the royal seal. The moment it caught the sunlight, something extraordinary happened. The cub jumped gently from Ilara's arms. It walked toward the medallion, touched it with its nose. Silver light spread across the engraved crest. Ancient runes hidden within the metal slowly awakened. They glowed like moonlight reflecting across calm water. Every royal soldier immediately lowered one knee. Their heads bowed. No command had been given. None was needed. The heir had recognized the seal. The seal had recognized the heir. Tears filled the eyes of old villagers who still remembered the forgotten legends. One elderly woman covered her mouth. The stories. They were true. Garrick's breathing grew heavier. His plans, years of careful planning, were collapsing before his eyes. If the heir lived, everything he had built through fear would disappear. His estates, his influence, his dreams of controlling the northern forests. Everything. His hand slowly drifted toward the sword hanging at his side. Commander Aldrin noticed immediately. So do I. Both men remained perfectly still. No one else breathed. Finally, Garrick forced his hand away from the weapon. He smiled. A cold smile. If what you claim is true, then surely the king would wish to see his son. Aldrin nodded. He does. We leave immediately. The journey began before noon. The villagers stood silently as the royal escort prepared to depart. Dozens of supply wagons rolled into formation. Mounted guards spread through the forest paths ahead. Archers disappeared into the trees to watch the ridges. Everything moved with remarkable discipline. Commander Aldrin approached Ilara. You should remain here. She looked down at the cub. Prince Kalen had curled quietly against her boots. When a young soldier attempted to lift him, the cub refused. It planted its paws firmly against the ground, then walked straight back to Ilara. Again. The soldiers tried a second time. Again the same result. Even Aldrin couldn't hide a small smile. The bond has already formed. Ilara looked confused. What does that mean? It means. Aldrin paused. He has chosen. She gently stroked Kalen's head. He barely knows me. The old commander shook his head. Wolves know hearts. They always have. That evening, as the caravan entered the deeper forests leading toward the mountain capital, the road narrowed beneath towering pines older than memory. Snow still covered patches of shaded ground. Cold streams crossed the winding trail. The air smelled of cedar, damp earth, and melting ice. Prince Kalen trotted happily beside Ilara's horse, refusing every attempt to ride inside the royal carriage prepared for him. Whenever she slowed, he slowed. Whenever she smiled, his tail wagged. Even the hardened soldiers began smiling whenever they watched them together. Hope, something many had forgotten, returned to the caravan. Yet Commander Aldrin rarely smiled. His eyes never stopped scanning the forest. Too many birds had gone silent. Too many fresh hoofprints crossed the old road. Someone was following them. Far behind the royal escort, hidden among dark pines, Lord Garrick sat astride his horse beside nearly 200 mercenaries. His face burned with quiet hatred. One captain leaned closer. My lord. The army is too strong. We cannot attack openly. Garrick slowly unfolded an old map. His finger rested upon a narrow mountain pass. Stone cliffs. One bridge. No escape. His smile returned. We won't. He looked toward the distant mountains rising beneath the evening sky. We'll let the mountains do the killing. Above them, unnoticed by every mercenary below, a great black wolf stood upon a rocky cliff. Its amber eyes watched Garrick in complete silence. Then, with one deep, haunting howl that rolled across the valleys like distant thunder, it disappeared into the gathering darkness. Far ahead on the winding road, Prince Kalen suddenly stopped walking. His ears lifted toward the mountains. The cub had heard the warning. But neither Ilara nor the royal escort yet knew that the deadliest part of their journey had only just begun. The mountain road climbed higher with every passing hour. The green forests of the lower valley slowly gave way to towering pines wrapped in snow, their branches heavy beneath blankets of white. Sharp winds swept across the cliffs, carrying tiny crystals of ice that sparkled beneath the afternoon sun before vanishing into the deep ravines below. The royal caravan moved carefully. No one spoke louder than necessary. The horses sensed the danger hidden within the mountains. Their ears flicked constantly, and every few moments they released uneasy breaths into the freezing air. Commander Aldrin rode at the front, his eyes searching every ridge. Behind him, archers moved silently along the rocky slopes while scouts disappeared among the trees. Ilara remained near the center of the caravan. Prince Kalen walked faithfully beside her horse. His paws left tiny prints across the fresh snow. Every few steps he looked up to make sure she was still there. Only then would he continue. The bond between them had become impossible to ignore. It was no longer the trust of a frightened cub. It had become something deeper. Something ancient. By sunset they reached Frost Pass Bridge. It stretched across a deep canyon carved by centuries of rushing water. Far below, an icy river crashed against black stone, its roar echoing endlessly through the cliffs. Commander Aldrin raised one hand. The entire caravan stopped. Something felt wrong. Snow covered the bridge evenly, except for one narrow strip near the center. Too smooth. Too perfect. He slowly dismounted. Kneeling near the edge, he brushed away the snow with his glove. Fresh cuts marked the ancient support ropes beneath the bridge. Someone had almost severed them. His face hardened. Back. The command was calm but immediate. Everyone back. The first wagons had barely begun turning around, when an arrow screamed through the air. It struck the horse beside one of the guards. The terrified animal reared violently. A second arrow followed. Then a third. The mountains exploded with sound. Dozens, hundreds of mercenaries rose from behind the cliffs. Snow cascaded down the mountainsides as hidden soldiers revealed themselves. Lord Gerrick's trap had sprung. "Hold the bridge!" Aldrin's voice thundered across the canyon. Royal soldiers rushed forward, shields locking together in practiced formation. Arrows rained from above. Wood splintered. Steel rang against stone. Horses screamed. The peaceful silence of the mountains disappeared beneath the chaos of battle. Ilara instinctively climbed down from her horse. She wrapped one arm around Prince Kaelin. "Stay close." The cub refused to hide. Instead, it stood protectively in front of her, its tiny body trembling, not from fear, but determination. Another volley of arrows darkened the sky. A nearby soldier stumbled, an arrow buried deep in his shoulder. Without thinking, Ilara rushed toward him. She dragged him behind a fallen wagon while arrows struck the wood only inches above her head. Blood soaked through his sleeve. "Easy," she whispered. "I've got you." With practiced hands, she snapped the arrow shaft, cleaned the wound as quickly as she could, and wrapped it tightly with linen torn from her own cloak. The soldier stared at her in disbelief. "You should run." She shook her head. "If I run now, who helps the next one?" The battle spread across the narrow mountain road. Commander Aldrin fought like a man half his age. His sword moved with quiet precision, never wasted, never hurried. Every strike protected another soldier. Every step held the line. Yet Gerrick had prepared well. More mercenaries poured from hidden caves above the cliffs. The royal guard slowly gave ground. Stone by stone. Step by step. The bridge behind them groaned. One of the damaged support ropes finally snapped. The entire structure lurched violently. Wood cracked. Ropes stretched. A supply wagon slid sideways. 2 horses lost their footing. For one terrifying moment, it seemed the entire caravan would plunge into the canyon below. Prince Kaelin suddenly barked. Not like a frightened cub. A sharp command. The horses froze. Instead of panicking further, they steadied themselves just long enough for soldiers to cut them free. Even Aldrin noticed. The little wolf had somehow calmed animals gripped by terror. As darkness settled over the mountains, snow began falling again. Large silent flakes drifted through the battlefield, covering blood, broken arrows, and shattered shields with quiet mercy. Gerrick rode forward through the storm. His black armor was untouched. His smile had returned. "You've lost." He looked toward Ilara. "Hand me the cub. No more lives need be wasted." Ilara tightened her hold around Kaelin. "No." One simple word. Spoken by someone with no sword. No armor. No army. Yet somehow, it carried greater strength than all of Gerrick's threats. His smile vanished. "Then everyone dies." He raised his hand. Crossbowmen appeared along the cliffs. Dozens. Every weapon pointed toward the caravan. Commander Aldrin slowly lowered his sword. Not in surrender. In acceptance. There were too many. He knew it. Everyone knew it. Then, a single wolf howl echoed through the mountains. Long, deep, powerful. Every person on the battlefield looked toward the northern ridge. Another howl answered. Then another. Then another. The mountain itself seemed alive with voices. Snow drifted from the cliffs. Trees swayed though no wind blew. Out of the darkness emerged wolves. Not 5. Not 10. Hundreds. Grey wolves. White wolves. Black wolves. Old wolves scarred by countless winters. Young wolves swift as shadows. They appeared silently from every direction. No snarling. No wild frenzy. Only calm purpose. They surrounded the battlefield. Mercenary horses panicked instantly. Some threw their riders. Others refused to move. Lord Gerrick's confident expression finally cracked. "This," he whispered. "This is impossible." Commander Aldrin smiled for the first time since leaving the valley. "No, it is a promise." The wolves did not attack blindly. They moved with remarkable discipline. Every pack worked together. Some blocked escape routes. Others defended wounded soldiers. Several enormous wolves stood protectively around Ilara and Prince Kaelin without taking a single threatening step toward her. One by one, Geric's mercenaries dropped their weapons. Fear spread faster than fire. Not because the wolves attacked, but because they didn't. The beasts they had hunted for years showed greater honor than the men who had been paid to kill them. Many mercenaries fell to their knees. Some wept openly. Others fled into the forest, disappearing forever beneath the snow-covered trees. Only Geric remained. Hatred burned too deeply inside him to surrender. He turned his horse sharply and galloped toward a narrow mountain trail leading higher into the peaks. Commander Aldrin shouted after him. But Geric never looked back. "He runs to the capital," Aldrin said. "He'll try one final betrayal." The royal escort crossed the damaged bridge before dawn. Behind them, the wolves vanished as quietly as they had appeared. Only fresh paw prints remained in the snow. 2 days later, the mountains finally opened. Before them stood the ancient capital of Valina, the fortress of Moonstone. It rose directly from the cliffs, carved into the mountain itself. Towering silver walls reflected the morning light. Great waterfalls poured beneath stone bridges. Thousands of banners fluttered from high towers. At the very center stood the palace of the Alpha King. Older than memory. Older than the kingdom. As the gates slowly opened, bells rang across the city. People gathered along the streets. Many wept when they saw the royal escort return. None yet knew why. Only that hope had come home. But hope had arrived too late. Far beneath the palace, inside forgotten tunnels carved centuries earlier, Lord Geric and the last of his loyal followers slipped through ancient passages known only to a handful of noble families. Torchlight flickered across damp stone walls. His face had become a mask of desperation. "If I cannot rule this kingdom." He tightened his grip around his sword. "Then no one will." Above those tunnels, deep within the palace, Prince Kaelan suddenly stopped walking. His ears lifted. A low growl rolled from his chest. The cub sensed the darkness rising beneath the castle. And somewhere below the hall of the first Alpha. The final battle had already begun. The bells of Moonstone Fortress continued to ring across the mountain city, their deep voices rolling from tower to tower until every street filled with people. Merchants left their stalls. Blacksmiths stepped away from glowing forges. Children climbed onto stone walls to catch a glimpse of the royal escort. For years those bells had carried only warnings, funerals, and prayers. Today, they carried hope. No one yet understood why. Commander Aldrin led the procession through the Great Eastern Gate, where enormous statues of wolves guarded the entrance. Their stone eyes seemed almost alive beneath the morning light. Ilara looked around in quiet wonder. The city had been built into the mountain itself. Terraced gardens overflowed with evergreen trees despite the cold. Crystal streams flowed beneath graceful bridges. Ancient towers reached toward the clouds, their silver rooftops shining beneath the pale winter sun. Every wall carried carvings of wolves running beside kings and queens. Not as servants. As equals. Prince Kaelan slowed his steps. The little wolf lifted his nose. He breathed deeply. Something here felt familiar. Although he had never walked these streets before. Or perhaps, some forgotten part of him had. The great doors of the royal palace opened before them without a sound. Inside waited dozens of guards dressed in ceremonial silver armor. They lowered their heads together. At the far end of the enormous hall stood a single man. The Alpha King. Age had silvered his dark hair. Deep lines rested beneath tired eyes that had known too many sleepless nights. Yet nothing had weakened the quiet strength in his posture. For years he had ruled with wisdom despite carrying a grief no crown could lighten. He had buried his queen. He had buried the hope of ever seeing his child again. Or so he believed. The vast hall fell completely silent. The king did not move. Neither did the cub. For one endless moment they simply looked at one another. Then Prince Kaelan took a single step. Another. Then another. His pace quickened. The tiny wolf crossed the polished stone floor and stopped only inches before the king. The old ruler slowly lowered himself to one knee. His hands trembled. Not from age. From hope too fragile to trust. Very gently, he reached forward. The cub placed one small paw into his hand. A tear escaped before the king could stop it. My son. His voice broke beneath the weight of years. I never stopped looking. The little wolf pressed his head beneath the king's hand. The entire hall watched in silence. Commander Aldrin lowered his head. Seasoned warriors wiped tears from weathered faces. Even servants quietly turned away to hide their emotions. Across the room, Ilara smiled through her own tears. The lonely cub she had found beneath a fallen tree had finally found his father. The reunion lasted only a few precious moments. Then, a violent explosion shook the palace. The polished floor trembled. Dust rained from the high ceiling. Somewhere below, stone cracked. Another explosion followed. Much closer. Commander Aldrin spun toward the guards. The tunnels. The king's face hardened instantly. Garrick. A frightened messenger burst through the great doors. My king. The lower passages have been breached. Fire has reached the Hall of the Ancestors. The king's eyes widened. The hall. Not merely another chamber. It was the oldest place in the kingdom. The sacred heart where the first oath between humans and wolves had been sworn centuries ago. If it fell, something far greater than stone would be lost. Without hesitation, Aldrin gathered a small group of royal guards. The king drew the sword that had rested untouched beside his throne for many years. Its silver blade reflected the firelight dancing beneath the hall. Ilara stepped forward. I'm coming. The commander shook his head. It isn't safe. She looked toward Prince Kalen. The cub had already begun running toward the lower corridors. He never looked back. He won't leave without me. The king met her eyes. He understood immediately. Then stay beside my son. Together they hurried into the ancient passageways beneath the palace. The tunnels smelled of damp stone and smoke. Flames flickered across old wooden beams. Shadows stretched wildly along narrow walls carved with fading wolf symbols. Some passages had already collapsed. Others groaned beneath the weight of the mountain above. Far ahead came the sounds of steel striking steel. The battle had already begun. Prince Kalen ran confidently through twisting corridors as though an invisible memory guided every step. Finally the tunnel opened into a vast underground chamber. The Hall of the First Alpha. Ilara stopped breathing. Massive stone wolves lined both sides of the chamber. Each towered twice the height of a man. Their eyes were carved from polished crystal that reflected every flame dancing through the darkness. At the center stood an ancient circular platform marked with silver runes. Above it, a single opening in the mountain ceiling allowed a narrow beam of daylight to fall into the hall. It looked almost sacred. It had remained untouched for centuries. Until today. Lord Garrick stood upon the platform. Several broken stone pillars lay scattered around him. His surviving mercenaries surrounded the chamber. Many were wounded. Some looked ready to flee. Yet Garrick's madness burned brighter than ever. If I cannot have this kingdom. His voice echoed across the ancient hall. Then its history dies with me. He drove his sword into the center of the platform. The silver runes cracked. A deep rumble shook the mountain. Large pieces of stone broke away from the ceiling. Dust filled the air. The hall was collapsing. Royal guards charged forward. Steel clashed once again. Commander Aldrin fought through the mercenaries with relentless determination. The Alpha King met Garrick blade against blade. Their swords collided in showers of sparks. Around them the ancient chamber continued breaking apart. Huge stones crashed to the floor. Smoke thickened. People shouted warnings. Yet Prince Kalen ignored the battle completely. His eyes remained fixed upon the center platform. Something called to him. Something older than words. He stepped onto the cracked stone. The broken runes beneath his paws began glowing faintly. Garrick saw him. No. With desperate fury he broke away from the king and lunged toward the cub. His sword rose high. Ilara saw it. There was no time to think. Only to move. She threw herself forward. Her shoulder struck Kalen just as Garrick's blade swept downward. The sword sliced across her arm instead. Pain burst through her body. She fell hard against the ancient stones. Blood stained the silver runes. Prince Kalen cried out. Not like a frightened cub. Like something far older. Far greater. The sound shook the hall itself. The beam of sunlight pouring through the ceiling suddenly brightened. Silver light spread across every ancient carving. The stone wolves surrounding the chamber began to glow. One after another. Runes awakened. Crystal eyes blazed like moonlight. A powerful wind rushed through the underground hall although no doors stood open. Every flame bent toward the center platform. Prince Kaelan stood perfectly still. His silver markings shone brighter than ever before. The tiny cub was gone. Not in body, but in spirit. He stood with the quiet confidence of the king he would one day become. A single howl rose from his chest. It rolled through the mountain. Across the fortress. Over the valleys. Into every forest of Valina. Outside. Wolves answered. Hundreds. Then thousands. Their voices joined together until the mountains themselves seemed to sing. The great stone wolves surrounding the hall lowered their heads. Not because they had come alive, but because the ancient magic within them had awakened. The old oath had been restored. Lord Gerrick staggered backward. No. This cannot be. The mountain answered him. The cracked platform beneath his feet broke apart. He lost his balance. His sword slipped from his hands. Commander Aldrin rushed forward. The Alpha King caught Gerrick before he fell into the opening beneath the broken stones. For one brief moment, the king held the man who had stolen so much from him. Gerrick looked up. There was no hatred left in his eyes. Only fear. The king spoke quietly. You destroyed lives for power. You hunted those who could not defend themselves. You betrayed your own kingdom. His grip loosened, not into the abyss, but into the waiting hands of royal guards. You will face justice. Not revenge. Justice. The guards carried Gerrick away in chains. His reign of fear had ended. Not by cruelty, but by truth. Hours later, the fires had been extinguished. The hall of the first Alpha still stood. Scarred. Broken in places. Yet standing. Outside, the first golden sunrise after the battle spread across the snow-covered mountains. Its warm light touched every rooftop of Moonstone Fortress. The people gathered within the great courtyard. The Alpha King stood before them with Prince Kaelan resting peacefully beside him. Then he called Ilara forward. She wore a clean bandage around her injured arm. She looked uncomfortable beneath so many watching eyes. The king smiled warmly. You arrived here with no title. No riches. No army. You carried only compassion. He turned toward the people. This kingdom still stands because one woman chose kindness when fear would have been easier. The courtyard erupted into applause. Not loud. Not wild. Warm. Grateful. The king presented her with the ancient silver leaf of Valina, an honor given only to those whose courage changed the fate of the realm. She accepted it with quiet humility. I only did what anyone should. The old king smiled. No. He looked toward the gathered crowd. You did what very few would have done. Spring came gently to Valina. Snow melted into clear rivers. Wildflowers covered the valleys once more. Children laughed freely in villages that had long lived in fear. The cruel rewards for hunting wolves were abolished forever. New laws protected the forests that had protected the kingdom in return. Travelers soon noticed something extraordinary. Wolves no longer hid in distant mountains. They could sometimes be seen standing peacefully along forest edges at sunrise, watching over the land before quietly disappearing into the trees. Never threatening. Always guarding. Prince Kaelan grew stronger with each passing season. Though destined to become the next Alpha King, he never forgot the small cottage where his second life had truly begun. Whenever royal duties allowed, he returned to Blackwood Forest. He always found Ilara tending her herbs just as she always had. The first thing he did was run to her. No matter how much he grew, he still lowered his great silver head so she could gently scratch behind his ears. Some things, even kings never outgrow. Years later, travelers passing through Blackwood often told the same story. They spoke of a peaceful cottage where wolves rested without fear, birds sang from open windows, and children learned that courage did not always wear armor. Sometimes It wore a simple cloak, carried gentle hands, and chose compassion when the whole world demanded fear. And because of one quiet woman's choice on a storm-filled night, a kingdom found its future again.